verses 16 through 37. The soldiers led Jesus away into the hall known as the Praetorium. Then they assembled the whole battalion. They dressed Jesus in royal purple, then wove a crown of thorns and put it on him. They began to salute him. "All hail, King of the Jews!" They kept striking Jesus on the head with a reed, spitting at him and kneeling in front of him, pretending to pay homage. When they finished mocking him, they stripped him of the purple and dressed him in his own clothes. Then they led him out to be crucified. A passerby named Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was coming in from the fields. The soldiers pressed him into service to carry Jesus' cross. Then they brought Jesus to the site of Golgotha, which means skull place. They tried to give him wine drugged with myrrh, but he wouldn't take it. Then they nailed him to the cross and divided up his garments by rolling dice for them to see what each could take. It was about 9 in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription listing the charge read, "The King of the Jews." With Jesus, they crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and one at his left. People going by insulted Jesus, shaking their heads and saying, "So you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days? Save yourself now by coming down from that cross." The chief priests and the religious scholars also joined in and jeered, "He saved others, but he can't save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from that cross right now so that we can see him and believe in him." Those who'd been crucified with him hurled the same insult. When noon came, darkness fell on the whole countryside and lasted until about 3 in the afternoon. At 3, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" A few of the bystanders who heard it remarked, "Listen, he's calling on Elijah." Someone ran and soaked a sponge in sour wine and stuck it on a reed to try to make Jesus drink, saying, "Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down." Then Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. La palabra de Dios.
Gracias a Dios.
Who understands Jesus? Go ahead and raise your hand.
Boom.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Mike. We got one. Yeah. We have been, I think, this is not a brilliant statement, certainly not groundbreaking, misunderstanding Jesus for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And I think evidence of this is in the fact that we have so many denominations and versions of what it means to be Christian, right? They say in the Jewish tradition, 6 rabbis, 7 opinions. And I know. And it's the same for us, right? And many people are in this room as many interpretations and opinions of what Jesus is and who he is and who he meant to be plus one. Right? Christianity is in some ways a religion devoted. I mean, we spend, theoretically, our time devoted to the exploration of what Jesus means and who he meant in the larger, what is often called salvific, saving history, the arc of the universe. And we still, even with all of that work, I think, don't understand who he is. We've tried so hard, and yet and sometimes I think, if I had just been with him while he was alive, then I would have understood him better, right? The problem is clearly the stories, not me. But the stories of this week, leading up to the cross, and in particular, what Amy just read to us. And then, of course, what follows, which we've been promised, the unimaginable resurrection. They all show us how wrong we are. They all show us every year how incredibly wrong we are. That there are, and were, as many different beliefs about who Jesus was as there were people witnessing his life and his death. Even in these stories we hear that people did not understand what he was about, even as they were physically present. And we hear he sets, this is the biggest pilgrimage event of the year. He's at Passover. Allison told such a beautiful version of that story to the kids that, what was happening with the various symbols. And it's Passover, it's celebrating one of the most significant moments in Jewish history, the liberation of Israel from slavery. That's the whole point of Passover. And they dare to celebrate while living under the shadow and the yoke of the foreign rule of Rome. They dare to celebrate their freedom, even as they know that the shadow is falling over them even then, right? And so we hear Jesus set the scene for this with his triumphal return, quote unquote. And he does this on purpose. As Allison said, there's choices being made over and over and over again. Every symbol, every move he makes is with intention. Every single one is a challenge and a kind of a wink at the Roman oppressors and to the crowd. Who will understand what I am saying here? Who will understand? The donkey he chooses is an ancient Eastern symbol for peace. As Allison said, he doesn't choose a war horse, he chooses a symbol for peace. And from the time of the Maccabees, the palm had been a national symbol of winning full political independence. And that had happened, remember, of course, all of you are Maccabean history scholars, yeah?
Yeah.
Right, I remember that too. In 164 BC, at the rededication of the temple, and again during the two Judean revolts against Rome, they continually used the symbol of the palm to remind themselves of what it meant to rebel, what it meant to be free. So palms are a sign of celebration of the festival of the harvest, which Leviticus commemorates as the celebration of the Exodus. All of these are going to have been built into the DNA of the Jewish people. All of these symbols. Palms equal freedom and triumph fought for and won from the oppressive forces that are around you. It doesn't just mean we're fighting, it means we have been triumphant. So Jesus' choices are drawing on a rich history, especially from the prophets, like Zechariah. There we encounter a messianic figure riding into Jerusalem on a colt, triumphant and victorious. He's drawing on the stories that these people would have had already in their bodies. And we know that the people think they get what he's about, because they cry out when they see him by quoting Psalm 118, which is, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." They're saying glory, power, triumph. They think what they're about to see is victory. He picks the time, he picks the symbols, he chooses his role, and he seems to be, at least in my estimate, intentionally setting fire to a powder keg. Yeah. He knows what he's doing, right? And so it's fascinating to try to understand what he's really about here, given that he seems to be so clear on the meaning of these choices, the triumphant Jewish king overcoming the oppressors of the people Israel, returning in victory to the city that holds God's very presence. It does seem like he's saying we will win. But because we have the benefit of hindsight, and those cheering for him as a victorious counter-conqueror don't have that hindsight. Not 1 week later, as we know, I think we know, he'll hang bloody and shamed and tortured and ultimately dead as a victim of the Roman cross. Now, crosses were also important. I mean, we wear them on our bodies as necklaces and charms. One of my ethics professors, Dr. Richard Sneed, used to say, "I wish that we wouldn't wear the cross, but we would bear it." And I've never forgotten that. And we have turned it into a meaningless thing in some ways. But for that population of people, for that time, for that moment, and following, crosses were Roman public relations tools. They were the statement outright that this is an enemy of the state. And they publicly cried out to all who witnessed their terror, Do not do what this person did, or this will happen to you. Don't cross us, we will always win. Your victories are meaningless and paltry. None can resist us, so do not attempt it. That's what the cross meant. Do not try to live. And Jesus knows this. The text tells us that he knows this. Over and over again, he's reminded his disciples of the outcomes of his choices, right? He keeps telling them over and over again, nope, you're not understanding me. He talks about dying and rising. He talks of the last days. He talks of taking up the cross and following him. He's kind of cryptic, but he's very stern about it. He says, pay attention. And then he begs God to help him be faithful in the path that he's chosen. He cries about it. The cross is not an accident. He knows what he is walking into. So I wonder why we persist in calling Jesus a victim. I wonder why we persist in calling Jesus a victim. I think it's because we still don't understand his choices. Because they seem like choices we would never make. Right? They seem otherworldly and foreign. I can't imagine putting myself in his shoes. And I think you're probably with me. We, like those who greeted him as the triumphant Jewish king on this day, on Palm Sunday, in that city, in Jerusalem, try to recast him into a shape that we can understand a little bit better. We try to make him into our shape. Because we understand, I understand suffering that is not chosen. Right? Do you understand suffering that has not been chosen, that you have not chosen for yourself? I think almost every human person knows that suffering. We know what it's like to be pressed in on by powers that we have no control over. We have felt the pain of having no control over what's done to us. We easily understand victimization that feels personal, that stems from the brokenness of systems. We understand that. Racism, heteronormativity, xenophobia, poverty, sexism, ageism, addiction. We know that we can connect with him there. And we would escape those in a moment if we could, wouldn't we? We would escape those in a moment if we could. But he chooses suffering on purpose instead. He rides right into the middle of it, face set, future certain. One of my favorite phrases in all of Scripture is Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. This is the kind of suffering that we can't quite always understand, right? And it's so hard to know why, especially because Jesus continually was given other roads he could have walked down. And he still chose this one. Almost frustratingly. He makes me so mad. Gosh, he makes me so angry. Like, it's like he is poking the bear. And he arrives where he must, which is the cross. But I want him to save his own life. I want him to want to live. I want him to take alternative roads, to show even the tiniest bit of self-preservation, which he doesn't do, not in a single sentence, except for when he's alone in the garden and he prays to God to take the cup from him. That's the only time. And I'm not even sure if that's wavering. I just think he was like, this is gonna suck, right? I know how bad this is gonna be. At any point, he could have chosen differently, but he didn't, despite the fact that he knew that this path was not only going to take him into the very lion's den, but would disappoint everyone who followed him. Every single person was going to be disappointed in what happened next. And my only answer to why he did this whole lead up, my only answer to why he did this is integrity. It's the only thing I can think of for why he was able to do this and willing to do it. That his inner knowing His relationship to the God of history and the cosmos and liberation was so clear and so congruent with his sense of self. He knew himself so well. He was so at one with who he was that he would never have stepped aside because he knew what his destiny was. He knew why he was there. He knew his purpose. He could have chosen other paths, but his integrity led him to follow God's vision rather than choosing what sounds like a really lovely life of being like a married rabbi in a small village somewhere in the countryside, never of any consequence, unfolding is just another part of human history. Doesn't that sound peaceful? Doesn't that sound lovely? He could have done that. He had the chance. But he knew that healing one person at a time mattered immensely. In the arc of history, though, that only healing everything would actually be a fulfillment of who he was. He could walk and heal and heal and heal and heal until the end of time. But it was only this one action that would actually fulfill what God had called him to do. And that's integrity. One author that I read this week made this claim. A major theological theme of Palm Sunday is hope. The entry of Jesus into the holy city of Jerusalem is the witness that God will not leave creation to continue with the status quo of power arrangements that rob people of what the divine intended. The entry of Jesus into the city of Jerusalem is a witness that God will not leave creation to continue with the status quo. And in the epistle this week, Paul says that Jesus emptied himself or made himself nothing. And Jesus believed that in order to do what he had to set himself aside. He had to completely set himself aside. It was worth literally any personal cost. Which I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever made a single choice that did not calculate some personal cost. And that's the cross, because what the Romans and the visitors to Jerusalem, even Jesus' own followers who had come with him, didn't understand was that it is only in personal generosity to the very edge of total sacrifice that will shift the cosmic power dynamic. Only that will actually move the mountain. That there is no victory, there is no winning if it's done through violence and power over and the way the world already works. There is no winning. That the willing presence of true disciples in the most broken places is the only thing that actually makes a difference. To be able to go to the edge and beyond, to quote my favorite movie, Point Break. That was a Keanu Reeves quote on Palm Sunday, y'all. I mean...
You gotta repeat it.
Don't get me started. But here's the thing. Walter Wink observed, we have to believe, this is so important, I think, because we could just say, okay, we have to be against things, right? We have to be against, we will have done the work. We'll be okay. We'll win. That's still just a different version of power dynamic we don't want to live into. And Walter Wink says this, we must believe that the powers are actually good. That the powers indeed are just fallen, like we are. And that the powers can be redeemed. Not overcome, not overpowered, redeemed. And that we can do it with God's Spirit coursing through us. That is what Jesus and the cross is trying to teach us, I think. That we have the power to change things if we live fully into our integrity as he did, worrying not even a little bit about whether, and this is going to be tough, we'll be loved or understood after we do it. It means we have to give up any sense of approval or need for affirmation in order to live into this calling of bearing the cross instead of just wearing it. I don't know about you, but that makes me very nervous.
Yeah.
It makes me very nervous. I don't know that without the Spirit in me that I can do that. So, church, as we enter this holiest of weeks, having prepared our bodies and our hearts through the clarifying practices of Lent, my question for you is, how's your integrity? How's your integrity? How congruent is your path with the cross right now? Can you and will you follow Jesus even to the end and beyond? What paths are you choosing that will reshape the future right now? As we walk into one-to-one conversation this morning, I want you to ask each other that question or reflect on it for yourself. How's your integrity right now? How congruent are you with the path to the cross? If you prefer to sit and reflect quietly on that, you're welcome and invited to do that. But I hope that you'll consider those questions together. So as we move into that, may you find the path that God has called you into. The time is short, the time is now. May you find yourself deeply immersed in God's vision and hope for the world and see yourself on the way to making it so, even today and even this week. In God's name we pray. Amen.